And then, let's go. A million in one hit! Oh my million! A million in one hit! Oh my god! Oh my god, is that a real number? A million in one hit! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god, I fucking did it! Oh my god! What's up? I'm SYROBE, and this is how I achieved over 1 million damage in a single attack, without any critical damage multipliers. Before we begin, I know there are going to be thousands of people who don't enjoy this sort of playstyle with glitches or buff stacking or whatever, but that's not exactly the purpose of this video, so please hear me out. While this does get the dopamine pumping to see damage number go big, which is always funny to see, but even when you know how this glitch works, it's easy to replicate but difficult to pull off successfully, because you will most likely be cancelled out of it or killed by the boss, and the success of the glitch also varies on the boss's hitbox. So the smaller the boss is, the worse the glitch is against that boss, like Mesmer or Rellana, and the larger the boss is, like the Hippo or Dancing Lion, the easier time you'll have. That's why I'm testing it on the Hippo throughout this video, because it's the easiest boss to replicate this successfully almost every time that I do it. Also, I am using to stop the enemies from moving, so I can show you all how this works. I've actually taken this experiment quite seriously in an effort to document and replicate the current working theory on what I believe is happening and how or why this is occurring within my game. Big shout out to my community for showing me that this even exists, but I've refined it to such a point to replicate this exploit very consistently, which is actually a lot easier than what people were telling me initially. Also, big thanks to ChurchGuard, who data mines and reverse engineer Souls games that I consulted my findings with. This video is meant to show exactly how to replicate this glitch, which is an essential part of QA testing to not only discover a bug, glitch, or exploit, but be able to replicate those findings in a consistent manner such that it becomes easier for the developers to find where the issue is actually occurring and fix the problem. And also, this is my first ever video of me buff stacking on my channel. I tend to avoid excessive buff stacking because I personally hate messing up a single buff and having to restart the entire process all over again. Usually just 1 to 2 main buffs per build is what I tend to lean towards. But for this build, I went all out. I wanted my first ever buff stacking video to achieve a damage number higher than 1 million in a single attack. I'm going to break down this video into 3 different categories. Number 1, what is required to make this interaction work? Number 2, what my findings have led me to believe for the current working theory on why this is happening. And lastly, number 3, a step-by-step tutorial on how to consistently replicate this exploit, hopefully with little margin of error. Starting off with number 1, as for what the core of this build is that the issue lies within, it specifically originates within the Wild Strike's Ash of War. This is one of the earliest and easiest Ashes of War to obtain in the entire game. It's literally located right before you fight Margit at the Stormhill Shack Grace. And for the weapon you want to use it on, technically you can get the same results with any weapon as long as it can have the Wild Strike's Ash of War on it. Your choice does matter a little bit. It does seem like the longer your weapon is, the more effective this exploit is, but I'll get into that later. Since the newest class of weapons, known as the Great Katanas, has a new basic weapon called the Great Katana. This weapon can have its Ash of War change and can be buffed by spell weapon buffs and weapon greases. It also can easily be obtained once you access the DLC area near the dragon very close to where you spawn in the Gravesite Plains. From my testings, the Great Katana is an extremely long weapon that can have the Wild Strike's Ash of War equipped to it. All the other possible weapons that you can put Wild Strike's Ash of War on tend to be a bit shorter. So I want to say that it is almost necessary to use the Great Katana specifically here, but also that you can in fact do the glitch with about any weapon that you can equip the Wild Strike's Ash of War on. But just from my findings, the longer the weapon's hitboxes, the better. That's really it for necessary components to the core of this build. I will say that the Great Katana with the Wild Strikes does also apply on-hit effects while this glitch is occurring, which means you can apply status effects almost instantly like Bleed or Frostbite. It also does deal a little bit of stance damage while the Ash of War is happening, which can actually trigger stance breaking on bosses if you land this successfully for long enough, which both can help you deal hundreds of thousands of points of damage within mere seconds. This can be increased exponentially by buff stacking and using as many applicable buffs as your character allows. So let's break down exactly what I believe is happening under the hood. Number 2, let's start this section off by demonstrating what happens normally when you use the Wild Strike's Ash of War. I believe the main reasons this glitch is occurring is a combination of around 3 different things. I'm sure there are more, but these are the 3 most important things. Number 1, the Wild Strikes and Great Katana collisions or hitboxes. Number 2, something else known as hit stop, which is caused directly by Wild Strikes and the game itself. And number 3, the sudden change of the player's direction created by target locking
onto an enemy and the camera panning out. Hit stop is basically what it sounds like. It's a brief pause in animation that occurs when an attack connects in a video game. It provides visual feedback to emphasize the impact of the hit, making it feel more powerful or satisfying. This technique is often used in fighting games, but within the context of Elden Ring, it's only stopping the animation of your player for a brief second, not the game itself. This is intentional and a part of the game for Elden Ring. There is nothing that I am doing to intentionally trigger the hit stop besides just hitting something with the Ash of War Wild Strikes. Again, the game does this on its own. This leads me back to the Wild Strikes collision. As you can see, the Wild Strikes normally has a brief, seemingly split second where your character pauses as soon as the strike hits an enemy. Again, this is intentional. What is unintended is manipulating this interaction with the hit stop and specifically turning by locking onto an enemy. This sudden turn is also another interaction that happens normally within Elden Ring. In isolation, if your character is not facing something directly, but it's within the player camera object's field of view and lock-on range, this forces your character to instantly turn to face the locked-on target. It's also not an instant snap, as it does have a small delay, which I believe is known as linear interpolation, also known as lerping for short, where it tries to smoothly change your initial direction-facing value to a brand new value to match the direction of the locked-on target. In short, this creates a smooth turnaround of 180 degrees, or whatever the in-game unit equivalence is. This lerping should likely happen on tick, which on tick essentially refers to actions or updates that occur at specific intervals. I'm assuming that the current interval for on tick is every single frame update, which is tied to your in-game FPS, which in this case mine is 60 FPS for Elden Ring. Not only can the player's direction lerp and change on every single frame update to turn you around smoothly, your player camera also needs to zoom out when you lock onto some enemies, which I assume is lerping as well on every single frame update. So many things are happening at once on every frame, and it gets worse. Now that I've explained that hit stop is caused by the Wild Strikes intentionally, and explained the directional lerping that is also caused intentionally by locking onto an enemy, which also intentionally zooms out the camera, this is what I believe is occurring. When you combine the directional lerping that happens every single frame update caused by the player target lock, but combine it with the Wild Strikes, which is constantly on every single frame updating the hit stop, which pauses your character when the Wild Strikes damages an enemy, and also every single frame update the location of the weapon's hit capsule changes, and the player camera being zoomed out on every single frame update as well, due to you locking on. Shockingly, the game does not like this, but luckily this only seems to stop and affect you, the player, and not the world around you. I would assume though, if you could unlock your frame rate, that might crash your game. Again, the hit stop only stops your animation, so what you can see is happening is that the player seems to be stuttering almost in slow motion. That's because the game is trying its best to, on every single frame update, turn your character around, move your camera backwards, hit stop your character's animation from Wild Strikes, and consistently update the hit capsule location on your weapon. I hope I did a decent job of explaining exactly why I believe these are the largest factors involved with this issue. I'm sure there are plenty of other technical things at work here, but these seem to be the main areas to focus on when covering how this glitch happens. This is also why I believe a longer weapon matters more, because the longer your weapon, the longer the capsule collider that is attached to the weapon. The reason you must start turned around is because the collider starts almost behind your character due to its long reach, and it takes much longer for that hit stop to allow your weapon to fully pass through an enemy, which a shorter weapon should pass through an enemy's hitbox a lot faster. There is no way to keep your weapon inside the enemy forever, especially when they're moving, so again, even though it's easy to replicate, your results will vary, especially when the boss is moving. So let's get into exactly how to replicate this, because it's a lot less complex than what I've heard others say. Step 1, have Wild Strikes on the Great Katana. Step 2, target the enemy so your angle is perfectly aligned to them. Step 3, untarget the enemy, but flip directly away from them. But keep your camera directly on the enemy. Just face your character away from them. Then use your input for the Ash of War Wild Strikes while you are still facing away from the enemy. Do not turn manually at all. Again, simply lock onto the target and the rest will follow. Do note that from my testing, you need to lock on at a fairly precise time. It seems like the weapon itself needs to be clipping the enemy's hitbox at the moment of the target lock-on input being sent to the game. So use your input for the Ash of War first, wait a split second, then lock on. Once the weapon crosses the enemy behind you, that's your time to lock on. The moment you start stuttering around, that's when you should know you've done it. Just turning your character manually doesn't seem to trigger the same effects, which is why I later added that the camera zooming out does also seem to play a factor in this glitch occurring. Again, the reason I'm showing this is mainly for educational purposes, but it's also really funny because FromSoft did just remove and fix the chainsaw glitch very recently, so it didn't take that long for another method to surface. But honestly, this one is a little bit less practical in my opinion. In a real scenario, the bosses are going to move away or interrupt you or even possibly kill you before you can get off its full potential damage of this glitch. You could try to supplement this with Endure or the Iron Jar Aromatic to prevent being interrupted, but that doesn't guarantee that you'll even hit your weapon when you lock onto the boss. And it's not 100% foolproof, as some bosses in the game can just randomly interrupt you regardless and ignore your poise with some unspecified attacks. If you enjoyed watching, please subscribe to my channel. I've had a ton of fun testing exactly how this glitch occurs, and I hope I was able to explain it well enough, at least for why I believe this works at the way that it does. Again, I'm sure there are more things happening behind the scenes, but for now, I've been SYROBE. Thank you all once again for supporting me for almost 3 years now, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace. I could do that, but I don't think I need it, I'm gonna be honest. Use that. Swap to that, swap to the, no, madness. Madness, madness. Drink this. Oh, I'm just gonna eat one of these because we forgot to eat one of those. That's not a part of the buffs, that's just because I forgot to eat that earlier. Then we go to Madness Talisman, all that. Right before these proc, we can double proc them at the same time. Animation cancel. One more tick. Auto do is good. Let's get that going. Nice. Nice. Should have been a little bit faster. Unfortunately, it was a little sloppy, but we'll take what we can get right now. Swap back, swap to this, swap to that. Seppuku. After Seppuku, go back to this. After that, go back to this, go back to that. Go back to this. And then, let's go.
Oh, 1,000,001 hit. Oh my million. 1,000,001 hit. Oh my god. Oh my god, is that a real number? 1,000,001 hit. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god, I fucking did it. Oh my god.